guess the objective now is to top Lucinda's failure story, and I don't think I'm going to be too challenged in that respect. When I told Connie this morning that I was speaking at an event about failure, she smiled at me and she said, "How are you going to choose?" So I grew up in Philadelphia, and I lived in West Philadelphia. When I was 7 years old, Philadelphia began the redevelopment of what is now called Society Hill. And my parents, who were very civic, took me down on a Sunday afternoon to the home of the mayor of Philadelphia, Richardson Dilworth. And he was very tall. He had a double-breasted suit, a gray demeanor about him, dressed very slick. And when we got into the car, I said to my dad, "Who was that guy and what does he do?" So he was the mayor of Philadelphia, and at age 7, that's what I decided I was going to be. By the time I was 41 and I was running for mayor, I had forgotten why I wanted to be the mayor, but I had this lifelong ambition, and I would say that although I've been in private equity and public finance and project finance and civic ventures and now the film business, nothing that I ever did was more challenging or more demanding or more frustrating or, as Lucinda suggested, requiring the management of your emotions than was 4 times running for public office. In 1999, I ran for an open seat left after Ed Rendell served as mayor. One of the key things about being entrepreneurial, I think, is being strategic. It is not necessarily great strategy to run for mayor of the city of Philadelphia with a 6-to-1 Democratic edge as a Republican. So you might want to put that down as one of the first things you try to do, is to survey the field and see what's plausible. But I, on election day, was in a race that, by every metric, being polls, was a dead heat. And it rained on election day in 1999, and I showed up at my headquarters in Northeast Philadelphia at around noon for a break, and there was a guy there who's actually seeming to have a press conference. All the television cameras were around this fella, and I realized it was David Brookstein. And I went to Central High School with David Brookstein, and he was giving a press conference telling the news that he was the last person I had ever beaten in an election in 11th grade. That was a momentum that certainly carried me through the rest of the day. I ended up losing that election by 1 point to John Street. And I want to say that in the 4 elections that I was involved in, each time, not as a career politician, but as an entrepreneur, as a business person, municipal finance person, my first election I raised $1 million. That was the private equity investment infused into that campaign. The second was $3 million when I ran for governor of Pennsylvania. In the third election, $7.5 million, and in the fourth election, $12.5 million. And after each election, the valuation was the same. It was 0. There was no coming in second in the business line that I had tried to pursue. Unlike, I think, the businesses that most of you are in, and every one of the companies we've heard about today could enjoy being in second place from an evaluation standpoint and an earnings standpoint. So I learned a lot about a lot of things running for public office. First of all, one of the key elements of pursuing public office is you need a fair amount of mental instability. Highly recommend. You have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and, despite every critical element of history, tell yourself that you can. In my case, no Republican had been elected in Philadelphia since 1947, and that just never deterred me. In my case, in the second election in 2003, no one had ever beaten an incumbent mayor. That didn't deter me. I will say something about that race, and some of you probably remember that. In 1999, I ran against John Street. I got 2% of the African American vote. You cannot win in Philadelphia doing that. So in 2003, I ran a very aggressive campaign all over the city, in every neighborhood. And with 4 weeks to go in the election, I was up 6 points in our polls, which in Philadelphia meant I was going to lose by 2. But I had 14% of the African American vote. I had worked really hard to get it. While preparing for a debate against Mayor Street at Drexel University, I'm sitting in Brian Tierney's office with the staff, the campaign, and the advisors all around me, And we are going through the kinds of questions that the press is going to ask. And one by one, everyone's phone or buzzer goes off. What do we call them? They were pagers. Yeah, you probably don't know what they are. They were around. And everyone left, and I was the last person left in the room. And they came back in and they said they found a bug, an electronic listening device, in the mayor's office. And the street campaign is suggesting that the Katz campaign put it there. And I looked around the room and I said, did we? Of course, it was the FBI, but you would have thought at that moment that given what was transpiring on the public landscape, that this election was over and that I was going to win. And of course, the exact opposite happened. And this is really important. I think it's an important lesson in life. Every preconceived notion that you have about events, whether they're private events in the private equity world or in the venture capital world, or they're public events, or they're historical events, nothing is inevitable. Nothing is inevitable. There's no element of history that happened because of inevitability. It happened because someone made a decision. Somebody was conscious about what they did. And the other side, knowing that they were in deep due, took 48 hours to figure out that an electronic listening device put into the mayor's office during a Republican administration a month before the election was the son of Watergate. And within 10 days, I went from being up 6 to down 14 without moving my lips. Maybe that was a mistake too, but I had no information. I had no understanding. All I had done was practice, swearing myself in. Nothing is inevitable. So, the last thing I want to say is that Lucinda talked a little bit about the aftermath of failure. In the public world that I was in, everyone who's for you, everyone who's with you, is with you until that day when it's over. And then they keep going. You, however, you hit a tree. And then you drop to the bottom of the tree. And then you find that everyone else went on with their life. In my case, thinking back to that 7-year-old boy who had a lifelong ambition and realized after 3 tries at it and a try for governor that ambition was not going to be realized, that was a lot more devastating in my mind than losing money. And it was a lot more devastating in my mind because for me, what I was doing was every day in the newspaper and on television and radio. So it was mortally embarrassing. And it was extremely difficult, I would say remains so, to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and remember not to measure your self-worth by your net worth. And that to me is probably the best lesson that I could take out of that part of my career. Such a career that it was. And in any case, I feel now at age 64 years old that the anxiety that accompanied me every morning, I will tell you that when I ran against Tom Ridge for governor of Pennsylvania, 60 days before the election, I did not want to get out of bed. Not any morning did I want to get out of bed because I knew that I was going to lose. And I was going to just lose. I was going to lose every county in Pennsylvania. And so I set a goal to win 1. And I did. I won Philadelphia. So I think that's very important too, that even in the face of inevitable failure or uncontrollable failure, there are little steps that you can take to give yourself the pumping up that you need to keep going.
Sam, what was the most challenging of the 4 elections for you, like personally?
The last one. The last one, it's hard to beat an incumbent, and John had done a decent job, but had alienated an awful lot of people. But the physical, violent, and uncivil nature of the campaign, particularly with one of the unions in town that had 5 people who were employed full-time to do nothing but harass me, my wife, and my children wherever we went, That was a memorable experience, and not a great one. I think also because of the bug and because of the experience of having every national Democrat in the country come into town and have a press conference and basically try to position me as a tool of the Bush administration. I'll tell you a very funny story, and I apologize, I know you all want to leave, but the day that George Bush came to Philadelphia to campaign for somebody but not me, my campaign wanted to get me as far away from him as possible. So I went to the Teamsters conference in Atlantic City. You can only imagine me at a Teamsters conference. And my presence there was required for about 20 minutes and spent the rest of the time at the factory outlet stores in Atlantic City, which actually was one of my better campaign days. But not to be disrespectful to the President of the United States, I asked Connie and two of my children, all of whom are lifelong Democrats, to go to the event in Delaware County to be present. And someone saw them and said, "Come with us," and then took them to meet the President. So there are hundreds of photographs taken of them. And while the President is speaking at Springfield, Delaware County, he decides to open his remarks by recognizing Connie Katz and her children and their husband, who's running for mayor. Next day, front page story in the Inquirer, Bush lauds Katz. And underneath it should have said, and Katz buys lots of stuff at Brooks Brothers factory outlets. Thank you.